recklessly printing money to help out people who might want to decide to buy a third BMW this year. That is not what the stimulus package is for. The lockdown measures in New York State clearly have not worked.
Never said I oppose fracking. Show the tape. Put it on your website. Put it on the website.
Live from Clark Studios in Rochester, New York. Broadcasting around the world. You're listening to You Made It Political, where the voice of the keyboard warrior is finally heard and the arguments presented are put to the political test. And now, here's your host, Matt Clark.
When Chuck Schumer said, "First we take Georgia, then we change America," he wasn't kidding. Since the Democrats took over, Biden has signed over 40 executive orders that have literally wiped out nearly every single one of Trump's America First policies. But Biden's latest executive order that now allows transgender athletes to compete against girls in high school has both Democrats and Republicans scratching their heads wondering if we're now taking things just a little too far. Within just hours of taking office, Biden signed an executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, which essentially means that now men can participate in women's sports. Did Biden just cancel women? Did the Democrats even think what repercussions this would have on high school and collegiate sports? Or did they once again impulsively and recklessly overreact because of their overwhelming obsession to change America at all costs? Let's over to Fox News and check in with Jen Psaki, where she defends the executive order that now allows transgender athletes to compete against women. So today on Fox News, we see White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki defending President Biden's executive order that called on schools across the country to permit students to participate in sports under their chosen gender identity. So obviously this raises an immense amount of controversy. I mean, people are going crazy all over America right now. College coaches, administrations, Democrats, Republicans. I mean, this is such an overwhelming mess to deal with, but I'm not surprised because, as usual, the Democrats act before they think. They always do, whether it comes to proposing bills, spending money that they don't have, and a slew of other executive orders that Biden has now forced upon the American people over the last few weeks. So what exactly is going on here? How outrageous of a situation are we all facing right now? So President Trump used his first few days in office, to announce an anti-discrimination executive order that many believe will now force schools to include transgender athletes in girls' sports. Now, the executive order didn't straight up say you must include transgender in women's sports, but it does prevent and combats discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. That's what's going on here. So if you're preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, what you are essentially saying is you must include transgenders, regardless of sex, to play with whatever gender sport they identify with, which ultimately means that if there's a transgender male who identifies as a woman now, he should not be discriminated against being able to play on the women's team. So it's essentially the same thing. And this is now where America is headed. And the rest of the world is confused. You better believe this is not a global issue. We are so far from this being what the rest of the world wants. America seems to be the only country that wants to go down this route. And do we really want to be going down this route? I mean, who exactly wants any of these policies, wants this to really happen, besides the LGBT or LGTB community? But they're not even the ones really playing sports. So we have to kind of take a step back and think, who's calling the shots here? Have they really thought through the repercussions? Let's see what the American people have to say on the absolute insanity of letting men play on women's sports. So again, Psaki defends order allowing transgender athletes to compete against girls. Biden claims trans rights are human rights. Okay, fair comment, and they are. Trans rights are human rights. No one's disputing that. We do want to give equality to all, but there needs to be a line in the sand to make sure that we're still treating both men and women separately, fairly. And that's where this treads dangerously on erasing women's sports, because that's exactly what we're doing here. We will push women out of sports, because what is sports all about at the end of the day? It's about winning. Everybody wants to win. Coaches want their players to win. The audience pays tickets to watch teams win. So at the end of the day, we want people to win. So if you have a handful of transgender men playing on a women's sport, we want to see that team win. We don't care anymore whether it's a woman or a man. So if you're going to allow all these transgender now to play on a women's team, they better win, because that's all I care about at the end of the day. So what's a coach going to do? Now stack that team with all men? Because what if one school has one transgender on the team, but another school has 10? Well, you better believe that other school is going to start recruiting more transgender men who identify as women to make sure there's an even playing field. So before you know it, we just canceled women's sports. That's all that this executive order is doing. Let's over to the keyboard warrior Cam and see what the American people say about the insanity of this executive order. Laura says, not fair. A boy competing as a girl with other girls will almost always win. Surprise, boys are built differently than girls. They are more muscular due to testosterone. Girls using testosterone are thrown out of competition. This is not right. That's a great point. If girls are caught using testosterone, they get thrown out. They are disqualified. So now you have men identifying as women who are just jacked with testosterone competing alongside women who are not allowed to take testosterone. It's illegal. So right there, the whole thing, the whole argument is flawed. It can't work. R. Scott says, goodbye, female sports. No more scholarships for your daughters who now compete with the men. Did Biden think about any of this before he started signing away? Did the Democrats sit down and have a conversation? Or did they once again recklessly and impulsively sign executive orders with no real thought process as to how this situation would play out? Ariel Davidson of the Jewish Institute for National Security of America wrote on her Twitter feed, sad day for women's sports. Women must now compete against biological males at the risk of injury and loss of title. Thanks to a new Biden executive order, don't ever tell me this is a pro-woman. It's not. It's destructive and malicious. So soon after, she came on Twitter. This is Ariel Davidson of the Jewish Institute of the National Security of America. After she came out with this, guess what starts trending? Hashtag Biden erased women. And rightly so, because that is exactly what this executive order is doing. It's erasing women. So it's only natural that you'd start to see the hashtag trend on Twitter that says Biden erased women. However, of course, the LGBT activists hit back, saying the order was simply Biden's attempt at moving towards a more inclusive society. Just as he pledged, remember, Biden made all these promises to everybody, to the LGBTQ plus community, as well as illegal immigrants. So now he needs to make good on his promises, even if that means destroying certain sectors of America. He was bought and paid for. That's what happens when you don't really have the support of the American people and you need to be bought. So now we've got a bought president in charge, signing literally our lives away, signing American history away, because he now owes it to the LGBTQ plus community to now include transgender men in women's sports. So, huge amount of backlash. People are furious. They have no idea how to even handle this situation. How do you even recruit at a collegiate level now? How are these pro sports and college coaches supposed to go out and recruit now? And you better believe there's going to be a handful of men who all of a sudden who aren't good enough to play pro. Guess what? They're turning transgender. They're going to go put their high heels on, raise their hand and say, actually, I identify as a woman now. And who's to stop them? Who's going to actually tell that man, you're not gay? Whose right is it to tell him? He might be gay this year. He might not be the next year. It's no one's business to tell him how he should feel, right? So every male now who cannot qualify or is not good enough to play at a men's level are going to start playing at the women's level. They'll be gay for a few years for all they care. It's going to pay the paycheck or it's going to pay the bills. So why not? So now we're going to have a handful of men straight up lie about identifying as women. And who's going to be able to call them out? Because that's inhumane, remember? It's not abiding to transgender rights. So we have a whole mess of a situation to deal with right now because Biden and the Dems, once again, did not think before signing their 40th plus executive order. Karen says, this is so wrong in so many ways. God have mercy on this administration for what they are doing to answer for and how many children they are ruining with their propaganda. That's exactly right. That's all this is. This is nothing more than left-wing propaganda playing to the liberal base. And it's not even playing to all of the liberal base. It's playing to the margin that they desperately needed it to play to in order to win. That's all that's happened here. It's propaganda playing to a very far left and progressive base that the Biden administration is now being held hostage to. First, they had to play to the illegal immigration base. We now owe 11 million illegal immigrants in this country citizenship. We have now stripped ICE, the ICE organization's rights away. They cannot deport immigrants now because he promised that they would all be able to stay in America. We have caravans coming from Guatemala, Honduras, because Biden said, if I get in, I'm good to stay. So he's made all of these promises that he's now being held hostage to follow up on because of a very far left and awful un-American agenda. I'm not calling the transgender or the LGBTQ plus group un-America. I'm referring to the illegal immigrant situation. But what he's doing as far as this transgender situation is concerned is he is in fact destroying American sports. And that is exactly what will happen. Joya says, this is a disgrace. And I feel terrible for every female athlete that is being forced to compete with these males. And make no mistake, that is what they are. Sugarcoat it however you want. They are biological males, female wannabes, but I guess they are not good enough to compete against their own true gender. Shame on Biden. I will not call him my president for pushing this outrageous practice. Notice how it's thousands and thousands of women who have a problem with this, and rightly so, because they are the ones being canceled. We are canceling women. And why? For what? For what reason? Just so a few far left transgenders can sleep better at night, who probably don't even care about playing in these sports in the first place. They just want to know America is not going to exclude them from society. But have we really been excluding transgenders from society? Why do they feel like that in the first place? After all, we've been accepting them. We have gay marriage now. For years, for decades, we've been accepting transgenders as a society. And if you don't think America is, go take a look abroad, and you'll have a very good wake-up call or a smack in the face to realize that transgenders have it great in America. Because in most countries, you go to prison for being a transgender. In most countries, you will be arrested. You'll be fined. It is illegal to be gay in many countries abroad. So I think America's done a great job not only making it legal to get married and not only including transgenders in our society, but I think we have done a very good job and in accepting them across the social norm and including them in many different industries. But into the sports sector, it does take things just a bit too far. And people are furious. They're disgusted with it. It's a complete slap in the face to all of the athletes who have worked so hard, to the women athletes that have worked so hard to get to where they are today. Matthew says, here's an idea. If it's so important they compete, give them their own league. Great idea. Give them their own league. They seem to act like every third person is confused when they look between their legs. Give them their own league. And we never have to hear about this again. It's a great idea. Why not? Paralympics. They have their own league. If you have a physical disability that you're unable to compete with in the Olympics, you would compete in the Paralympics. And I think this is a phenomenal idea because genetically, you just cannot compete at the same level. It's impossible. And the same situation holds true, or the same ideology holds true to this situation right here. Transgenders, men, biologically will outcompete women all day long. So if they want to go compete at that level, then maybe they should have their own league. I would even go as far to say is that's what we should do with public bathrooms. If a man wants to identify as a woman, they should have their own public restroom. This way, women won't feel threatened. Little girls in America won't feel threatened. Fathers of little girls won't feel threatened. There will be no funny business with men identifying as women just for the sake of making their way into a women's bathroom. A lot of harm, more harm than good, will come of any of this. How many rapes are going to need to occur before we say, you know what, maybe it wasn't a good idea letting transgender men into the women's bathroom? Because you better believe there isn't a single father of a young girl who's going to take their chance before knocking some guy out for following her into the bathroom. So between assault and rape, we're going to have a lot of crime on our hand if we don't try to understand how to include transgenders, but still separate them for safety in certain circumstances. David says, nope, it's totally wrong and unfair. I thought they were all about the science. Science tells us at birth, male has massive physical advantages. This will ruin women's sports. You know, the Democrats seem to only want to follow the science when it suits them. Have you guys noticed that? They only follow the science when it suits their agenda. As soon as it no longer fits their narrative, they want to abandon the science. The science does say, biologically, men are a lot stronger. The science says, nope, if women take testosterone, it's unfair. So it's very contradicting as to what science we're supposed to follow. Coronavirus has been a complete disaster. We've been following the science the entire time. Cases are now going down. Teachers were happy to follow the science when they were told to stay home. Now the science says, you know what? It's okay to go back to school and you don't even need a vaccination. It's safe. Nope, they want to abandon the science. The teachers' unions. And we all know that most of the teachers' unions are diehard liberals. So liberals, Democrats have a very hard time following the science when it doesn't suit their narrative. But they're very quick to ram it down everybody else's throats when it suits or benefits themselves. Let's head over to the Fox News article and we'll take a look exactly how Jen Psaki defended the executive order today that allows transgender athletes to compete against girls. Biden says trans rights are human rights. I absolutely agree with him on that. I agree that trans rights are human rights. But when it comes to our sports, we still need to maintain a specific level of competitiveness. Otherwise, you destroy the entire industry. So opponents say allowing students born biologically male to compete against girls is unfair. That's the biggest argument here. Allowing students born biologically male to compete against girls is straight up unfair because genetically they have a massive competitive edge. So Jen Psaki gets questioned about, hey, can we talk about Biden's executive order for a second? What did he mean by this? So Psaki defended President Biden's executive order that called on schools across the country to permit students to participate in sports under their chosen gender identity. So this is what Biden is calling for. He's not making it mandatory, but what he's doing is indirectly forcing it on schools by saying the executive order does make it illegal to prevent discrimination towards transgenders. So it's a very sneaky way of forcing this on schools and potentially pro sports in the future. So a reporter asked what Biden's message was to school officials tackling the dispute. So when asked by a reporter Tuesday what Biden's message was to school officials tackling the disputes regarding transgender and cisgender girls competing together, particularly for college scholarships, Psaki said, well, the president believes that trans rights are human rights, which is like the dumbest answer in the world. And it's not even an answer, but that's what Jen Psaki does. She deflects and circles back. The only problem is Psaki never really gets back to the circle back part. So it's a horrible answer. She doesn't have an answer. That's why the Democrats have no idea. Rand Paul then gets involved, and Rand Paul has a hearing over this, and he claims that allowing transgender girls, individuals who were born male but identify as female, to participate in women's sports would completely destroy girls' athletics by depriving female athletes the opportunity to fairly compete and obtain scholarships. And it's absolutely right. How is a single woman going to get another scholarship? Why? If I was a coach and I wanted to stack my team of the best athletes possible, because that's what a coach does, a coach wants to win, I would stop recruiting women. If I can get away with stacking my women's team with transgender men, I'm going to give them all the scholarships. It's exactly what I would do. Why wouldn't you? Any coach in any school would support that decision because a school draws revenue from winning sports teams. The scholarship money has to come from somewhere, and if that team doesn't keep winning, the money's not going to keep coming in. They'll lose fundraising to keep the whole system going. So these college coaches are now going to start looking at men to give their scholarship money to, therefore completely eliminating and wiping away any potential for women to get their scholarships. So what is executive order? Now, the same executive order Biden said children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom, the locker room, or school sports. I still think we haven't thought this through. How is this going to work with women who are scared about sharing a restroom with men? It makes them feel very awkward, uncomfortable. And somebody made a comment earlier in the show that said, hey, give them their own league. And I'd like to follow suit by saying, give them their own bathroom, at least for the foreseeable future, until we can really understand what psychological and emotional effects this is going to have on women. Because as a father, if I had a daughter, I don't, I have a son, but if I had a daughter, I'd be very worried. I'd feel very threatened by the situation. And I know, and I've spoken to so many men who are worried about the situation, and they do not want to send their kids to a school that has anything to do with public restrooms or a college that allows this. But the Biden administration has not given any direction. See, this is where they always fail and they always go wrong. They don't have a direction. They don't know how to tackle any of these issues. They just write these ridiculous executive orders into effect without any real logical thought process as to how the whole thing's going to play out. So again, the administration has not given any direction as to how public schools should handle tough questions surrounding what is considered fair for high school athletes. Something that former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, has voiced frustration over. So Nikki Haley's even said, hey, guys, what direction are we headed here? How, have we thought about the situation? What's going to happen? Have we considered all the variables involved? Of course they haven't. So across the sporting world, the game is being rigged against women in favor of biological men. The South Carolina Republican wrote for the National Review Monday, President Biden is the latest man to do the rigging, which is strange coming from someone billed as a defender of women. So Biden, who thinks he's doing such a good job, such a good, noble job to cater to the LGBT community, is actually doing just the opposite. He's actually countering everything he claims he's doing, which is defending women, but he's attacking women. Those are the very people that he's actually attacking. Generations of women fought hard to ensure that their daughters and granddaughters had a level playing field because girls deserve the same chance as boys to play sports, she goes on to saying. This is Nikki Haley. Adding that transgender kids deserve support and respect, but the fact remains, however, that biological boys and girls are built differently. And the best male athletes have a natural advantage over the best female athletes. That's exactly the case. Politicians are furious over this. Women are furious over this. College administrations, coaches, athletes, furious over this situation. So many claim that the order will now make it, okay? Because again, it's not mandatory, but many claim that this executive order will now make it compulsory for schools to allow transgender female students to compete in girls' sports. In March 2020, this is interesting, Idaho became the nation's first to prohibit transgender students who identify as female from playing on female teams at public schools. So we're going to see now. So schools have already come out before this executive order and said, no, we're not participating in this nonsense. Women play women's sports, men play men's sports. And Idaho became the nation's first, good for them, to prohibit transgender students who identify as female from playing on female teams at public schools. So now we have this executive order that's going to pretty much tell them they have no control over how to run their school anymore. They are now being dictated to how sports will now be played amongst their communities. And again, the draconian dictatorship from the Biden administration just continues. Lockdowns, is where it all started. Businesses then being forced to close. Now we have transgenders being forced to play on women's sports. Schools are still shut. We're being held hostage as to when they're supposed to be reopened. America has been flipped up on its head. And there is no sign of this craziness ending. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. And I don't see it happening until America finally wakes up and realizes just how much of a disastrous mess the Democrats have put us in. I don't think we're there yet. I think we need a couple more years of insanity for the other half of the country to wake up and realize just how ridiculous this whole thing is. Currently, 16 states in America have friendly policies that help facilitate full inclusion of trans and non-binary students in high school athletics. Again, I think it's great. I think it's great that we at least try to understand how to include transgenders into sports. But I don't think we've really put much thought into exactly how fair the situation is when you include men on a women's team. So obviously the Trump administration was completely opposed to the inclusion of transgender females athletes in girls' sports and threatened to pull funding. Biden wiped that out with the stroke of a pen, his first executive order saying, nope, we want nothing to do with that. I promised the LGBT activists in exchange for my votes. Now we get to destroy sports across the country. Let's head back to the keyboard warrior Kim. We'll take a look at some other comments and what other Americans have to say about Biden's new executive order that makes it mandatory that transgenders are now allowed to play on women's teams, therefore creating an extremely unfair playing field. Albert says, remember, Biden campaigned as a defender of women. Obviously, he doesn't know the difference, and you all believed him. You ruined and now corrupted women's athletics. That's exactly what's happened here. He has corrupted and destroyed the very people he claimed he defends. But I'm not surprised, because Biden doesn't think before he writes. None of them do. Sherry says, I hope the women who voted for this man are proud of themselves. They have just screwed over their daughters, granddaughters, sisters, aunts, and mothers. What's going to happen when transgender men are now allowed to play on women's sports, or the other way around? Let's talk about this for a second. What's going to happen when a female identifies as a man and demands that she gets a tryout with a professional football team? At first, the coach is going to say, you're not good enough. But eventually, there's going to be a case where that woman is going to sue the team for discrimination. And she will win. She will win. So what's going to happen now when women start making their way onto professional men's football fields? And suddenly 10%, 20% of the team is now women playing up against an all-male team. Well, you know, the team with women, let's not beat around the bush here, are going to get destroyed. So ratings are going to drop, ticket sales are going to decrease, and the club will ultimately suffer financially. Viewers at home aren't going to want to watch it. They barely watch women's sports to begin with. No offense. Women, I mean, look at our women's soccer team. Some of the best in the world. Far better than our men's team. I mean, they are phenomenal athletes. And to be honest, I bet a few of them could actually get away with playing on the men's team, if not better than some of the men themselves. So I have nothing against women's sports, but we do need to keep it separate, because we can go down a very disastrous rabbit hole here, and financially, the industry could lose so much money that it may never be capable of rebounding if we lose these clubs too much money. So I don't know how this is going to work in college. I don't know how this is going to work in pro athletes. Clearly, women don't even know how it's going to work. They're scared now that they're going to be pushed out. It's already hard enough for women in life to begin with the discrimination that they have against them playing on a women's team already, without men now coming in and making things 10 times worse. I think it's great that people are comfortable expressing themselves. I think it's great that transgenders are that comfortable now amongst an American community. I do think we've done a great job of including them in society. I know transgenders. I know so many gay people. I think they're some of the most creative and funniest and outspoken and nicest people in the world. But there is a place within the sports industry for them to play. And a male identifying as a woman on a women's sport team is not one of those places. Let's go back to the keyboard warrior cam and see what a few other Americans have to say about men playing on women's sports. Chrissy says, this is such a step backwards for women. Where are the women's rights activist groups? They need to cause a major stink. That's a good point. Where are they right now? We have the LGTB activists now fighting. Where are the women's rights group fighting? Because this is an attack on women's rights. This is exactly what this is. The whole thing is very counterproductive. They need to cause a major stink. She goes on to say, I can't believe this is happening. So very, very sad. Ashley says it doesn't even make sense. What about women's rights? They should have their own special assigned team. No way is it fair to any girl, women. The physical strength does not compare. And we'll end here with John's comment. John says, just one more attempt to make us all the same. Newsflash, we are different. Different sexes, different races, different backgrounds, and everything else, from different personalities to different body shapes to hair color. Everybody is different from everybody else. That is what makes people so interesting. Even though we are all different, we should always remember to treat everyone the same. Stop with the social agenda of trying to make us all the same. It is a phenomenal comment to end the show on, and it goes into the whole equity conversation, which I think is total and utter BS. We are not all the same. Some kids will work harder than others, and they deserve a better opportunity because they worked harder. Equity is not the same as equality, so don't fall for it. Equality is giving everybody a fair opportunity to try their best. The operative word here being try their best. Equity is pretty much guaranteeing that everybody, regardless of skill set, gets the same job. That is not going to happen ever. It is not realistic. There aren't enough jobs in the world to give everybody, regardless of their skill set, the same position. So I know the Democrats and the Biden administration is pushing equity, which is a very silly and senseless policy that is never going to work in America. Because while your kids are out buying into the whole equity thing, I'm going to be teaching my kid to fight and win, and he will thrive and rise to the top and blow past anyone who buys into the equity nonsense. So, equity, transgender men playing on women's sports, the whole thing is just way too radical for me. It's too progressive. We are going so far left here, but are you surprised? We've lost everything, the Republicans. We don't stand a chance in fighting any of this nonsense. This is why you don't see women's rights activists out there, because they've lost their voice. We're getting trampled on. America is literally being destroyed in front of our eyes, and this is just another executive order that Biden has now rammed down our throats to derail this country even further. But here we are. The Dems are in charge for the next 4 years. We all got to suck it up, hope for the best, cross our fingers. God knows what's going to happen. I just hope things don't get any more insane than they already are. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. You've been watching You Made It Political. Please share this show, like it, drop a comment, spread the word. We are now on Amazon Music, iTunes, and Spotify. So we're making big moves, baby. We're getting our names out there. Thank you so much for the support, every single one of you. I really appreciate doing these shows every day at 3 p.m. I'll see you tomorrow, same time. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thanks for listening to You Made It Political with Matt Clark. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the show, or leave us a review on iTunes. And if you like our show or want to know more, check out YouMadeItPolitical.com.